In 1945, the United States dropped atomic bombs on Japan. Almost nobody knew it was coming. Not the press, not Congress, not even the vice president. How do you hide something that big? First you censor, then you propagandize. Author Terry Hansen argued in his book, The Missing Times, that the same playbook has been running against the UFO topic for decades. The only difference is, this time, the cover-up hasn't ended. I'm a lawyer. I began my career as a prosecutor, and I know what it looks like when someone's building a case. And what Hansen has done here is remarkable. He doesn't just say there's a cover-up, he gives us the elements, the specific behaviors you'd expect to see if a covert deception program were in place. Then he shows you the evidence. This kind of content is what you're interested in? Please hit like and subscribe. I put out a new video every week. Today, we're walking through Hansen's framework, the censorship, the propaganda, and the question at the heart of it all. What are they still hiding? The Missing Times is about a deliberate strategy of UFO secrecy. In other words, a cover-up, and the media's complicity in that cover-up. Hansen describes his analysis this way. Based on reviewing censorship and propaganda methods in use over the past century, it's possible to construct a theoretical covert deception program that would address the key political dangers presented by the UFO situation. Just as science proposes hypotheses to explain and predict natural forces, the hypothesis of an ongoing deception campaign can be used to forecast the possible social behavior of both intelligence and news organizations. If such behavior can be documented, then we can reasonably assert that the hypothesis of an ongoing covert deception campaign is much more than just a paranoid delusion. What is the quote-unquote social behavior undergirding censorship and propaganda that Hansen is referencing? For censorship, there are 13 types of behavior. I'm going to go through them one by one. Military secrecy, i.e. censorship at source.
So all I could do is keep my mouth shut. And General Ramey is the one who discussed or told the newspapers, the newsmen, what it was and to forget about it. It was nothing more than a weather observation balloon. Of course, which we both knew differently.
I don't want you talking about this. Don't say a word about this. Or were you with that term debriefed?
What they did. These people virtually told us just to shut up, get to your vehicles, and be quiet.
My name is John Callahan. I'm a retired FAA employee. When I tell the media what, he says about the UFO, and when it was all done, the CIA, one of the CIA men told the people they were now sworn to secrecy, that this meeting never happened, and this event never happened.
My name is Donna Hare, and I worked at Philco Ford Aerospace from 1967 to 1981. And I said, is that a dot on the emulsion? And he said, and he's smiling, and he has his hands crossed, and he said, round dots on the emulsion don't leave round shadows on the ground. As I asked him, what are you going to do with this piece of information? And he said, we always airbrush these out before we sell them to the public. So they're pesky little creatures appearing on this photograph they wanted to get rid of. A guard told me that he was asked to burn some photographs and not to look at them. And there was another guard guarding him who was in green fatigues watching him burn the photographs. And he said he was too tempted. He looked at one, and it was a picture of a UFO. And he was very descriptive. I can go into that later with anyone. He immediately was hit in the head, and he had a big gash in his forehead. He was knocked out, and he's terrified.
Discreet, high-level contacts with publishers and media owners.
In 1953, again, when the debunking policy was established, the National Security Council at the White House asked H.P. Robertson, a very famous scientist at that time, to conduct what has come to known as the Robertson Panel. And it was classified top secret. And we, not too long ago, got a copy of a sanitized version of that. And in it, they outline a complete debunking program. And one of the things that they stressed was using well-known personalities to get on TV and radio even Walt Disney, they wanted to use Walt Disney Productions to do exactly what you say, build up a case that looked like it was a real UFO, and then after everybody, thought this was real, then they pull the rug out from under it. And they actually, in detail, showed how this could be done, and it should be done. And this is the policy that they've been carrying out ever since.
Monitoring and interception of UFO-related news reports.
We go after a fantastic story. The story that flying saucers from other worlds are visiting our planet, just as we are exploring outer space with our own rocket satellites. Our guest is former Marine Air Corps Major Donald Keyhole, who has the support of scores of prominent businessmen, military men, and some scientists in his campaign to prove that flying saucers exist.
And the Air Force saw the mimeograph sheet, the Air Force representative, according to the Armstrong writer, said they would immediately deny it on the air, and if you allow your camera to come in on it. This is a sheet from the script of the Armstrong Theater, which was deleted. This was crossed off, and I was told that I couldn't say it on the air. Now that was censorship by intimidation.
Lifetime secrecy agreements. In other words, non-disclosure agreements, or NDAs.
Mr. President, I'm asking you directly, waive the non-disclosure agreements that still bind these patriots. Grant immunity to anyone and everyone who has already come forward and everyone who will come forward. Open the door and let them speak.
Recruitment of influential journalists.
Real concern that planted story is intended to serve a national purpose abroad came home and were circulated here and believed here, because this would mean that the CIA could manipulate the news in the United States by channeling it through some foreign country.
Do you have any people being paid by the CIA who are contributing to a major circulation American journal?
We do have people who submit pieces to American journals.
Do you have any people paid by the CIA who are working for television networks?
This, I think, gets into the kind of getting into the details, Mr. Chairman, that I'd like to get into in executive session.
Surveillance of UFO organizations and individual researchers.
You alluded to government involvement, limited government involvement, or at least interest still in the ranch. Have you witnessed any of that?
They told me when I first started, they said, hey, officially, the government isn't officially involved, but they are still interested both behind the scenes and in front of the scenes. And, but they told me when I started, they said, hey, just be aware, it's possible that, you might have the government listening to your phone calls or checking your emails. So just be careful what you say, follow your NDAs that you've signed. The government will fly over. The government has done grids we've seen with airplanes over the ranch.
And helicopters too.
Helicopters coming in, yeah. And Black Hawk helicopters coming in.
Theft and confiscation of evidence.
This is when we hear about, in the documentary, the USAF, United States Air Force. Yeah.
USAF.
Yeah.
USAF. I kept thinking, USAF. What's this guy talking about? USAF.
Yeah.
USAF.
Landing.
Yeah. And we have testimony from military X that he drove the trucks from Humanitas Hospital to Eza military base and then from Eza to Campinas. And so, logically, something was loaded up on there. That would have been where the Americans stepped in. And now we have new
metal boxes.
Metal boxes, whatever. I don't know how long the creature that was in captivity that was alive. We don't know how long it stayed alive.
Yeah.
Was it alive when the Americans took it? My understanding is it was. Now we have testimony from the chief of police.
Yeah.
Not anonymous, but whole commotion. And he's like, yeah, the Americans came to Campinas, and that's when they took the stuff.
We turned our weapons in back to the armory. We took our gear off back in our berthing, and we went upstairs to be debriefed by an admiral that I've never seen before. My camera was on my rack, and the memory card that was in it was out, and my battery was out of the camera, missing as well. So all of that was missing. The only thing that was there was the camera. Mind you, I had my locker secured. I had other stuff that was basically piled on top of that camera. So whoever did it knew what the hell happened.
Sir, it was a saucer, came flying over their heads, put down 3 little landing gear and landed right out on the dry lake bed. And they picked up their cameras and started over toward it, filming as they went. And when they got in fairly close to it, it lifted up, put the gear back in the wheel wells, tipped up, and took off at a great rate of speed. I send the film forward to Washington in the base jet airplane, and I don't know whether anyone's ever seen it since.
Acts of sabotage.
Funnily enough, 2 or 3 months after this, the same Donald Menzel was cited to debunk the whole Washington flap. He becomes director of Harvard Observatory. And the first thing he does is that he goes and destroys 1/3 of the photographic plate collection. And he doesn't even ask the astronomers. He asks his assistants to dispose of the plate collection, just by chance.
During all of 1952, it must be said, Donald Menzel was clearly obsessed with these flying saucers. What we learn is that he's meeting with top-level Air Force officials in May of 1952. He met with the head of Project Blue Book, Captain Edward Ruppelt, but also many generals, many other high-level Air Force people. Then, a couple of months after that, he takes over at the Harvard Observatory and seemingly immediately begins the destruction of the astronomical plates. But there's one other thing here that has to be mentioned, and that is the discussion of these so-called mystery satellites.
Character assassination.
I believe, it's a belief system of mine, that this nutty fringe around UFOs is part of the sort of concerted effort to keep serious study of it down. Anytime anybody tries to study this subject seriously, we're subject to ridicule. I'm a full professor at a relatively major university, and I'm certain that my colleagues at the university laugh at me and hoot and holler behind my back when they hear that I have an interest in studying unidentified flying objects. And that's just one of the things that we have to live with.
Dr. James McDonnell was a good example of what ridicule can do to people who are involved with UFO research, especially if they have credentials.
Another thing that's common all over the world is the scoffing and ridicule from official sources, from my fellow scientists, largely, well, almost entirely.
In the early morning of June 13th, 1971, Dr. James McDonnell walked into the Arizona desert. An hour before dawn, he put a gun to his head and ended his life.
Threats against individuals and organizations.
And I said, "Where was the crash?" And he said, "There wasn't any crash." He said, "You did not see any crash. There was not any crash." And he said, "You get the hell out of here, and you didn't see anything, and you don't talk to anybody." He said, "You're going to get in a hell of a lot of trouble." And I said, "Look, I'm a civilian, there ain't a damn thing you can do to me about it." He said, "No, but somebody might be picking your bones out of the sand." That's when he made the remark there. Then there was a black sergeant that was standing beside him, and he said, "Yeah, but he would make better dog food for our dogs."
Harassment.
I started being harassed at work. I started by odd telephone calls that would come during the day. At night at my house, I would get telephone calls all night long, sometimes 3 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, midnight, 10 o'clock. People would call and start screaming at me, "You're going down, you're going down, motherfucker." And that's all they'd say. And they keep screaming that until I finally hung up the phone. One night, somebody blew up my mailbox by putting a big load of skyrockets in it. The mailbox went up in flames. And that night at 1 o'clock in the morning, the phone rang. I picked it up and somebody said, "Skyrockets in your box at night. Oh, what a beautiful sight, mother." Things like that have happened on and off since 1982.
Have you faced any retaliation or reprisals for any of your testimony or anything on these lines?
Yeah, I have to be careful what I say in detail because there is an open whistleblower reprisal investigation on my behalf. It was very brutal and very unfortunate, some of the tactics they used to hurt me both professionally and personally, to be quite frank.
Because of my direct knowledge of the reality of certain legacy UAP programs, my professional career was deliberately obstructed, and I have endured sustained reprisals from government agencies for over a decade. These issues include medical malpractice committed by Veterans Affairs staff, denial of work I performed while enlisted in the United States Air Force, forged and manipulated employment documents, workplace harassment, including colleagues being directed to not speak with me, manipulation of my security clearance by certain agencies, blocking, delaying, and ultimately removing my ability to be employed within the IC.
Incarceration of dangerous or uncooperative individuals.
It was more like an interrogation room, and I sat in there for, I don't know, 15 hours. Those guys with a light, I mean, they put this light in my face, and they were yelling at me, and were hollering and cursing, and you didn't see anything, you know, and we'll do you and your whole goddamn family. And they're you know, it was basically that for about 8 or 9 hours. I mean, they took breaks. They were like, "Look, man, we're gonna take you off in a helicopter and just kick your ass out in the jungle, and we're gonna end you and all this." And I was sitting in a chair, and I was handcuffed to the chair, and I couldn't move.
And Assassination.
He was talking about being erased. And I said, "Man," I said, "what do you mean erased?" He said, "Yes." He said, "You will be erased."
I hope it's random, but we're going to know in the next week and a half. I just left the meeting on that subject, so pretty serious stuff, but look at it be now. Hopefully, I don't know, coincidence, if you want it, whatever you want to call it.
Sounds crazy, but between Garcia and General McCaslin, I have to wonder, and again, I know this sounds crazy, but it could be an option here. I mean, is the government doing this? Are they taking out their own people?
Censorship is step 1. Propaganda is step 2. As Hansen puts it, censorship is the first step in any propaganda campaign. The public must first be kept ignorant of selected facts so that false information will be accepted with little question. And I'm going to read off the methods of creating and spreading propaganda. First, cover stories, damage or spin control, bogus investigations, documents, and reports, recruitment of influential people as media spokespersons, use of group leaders to influence lower-ranking members, front organizations, targeting of selected influential groups, psychological operations, i.e. PSYOPs, rumors and misleading information, i.e. disinformation, use of deep cover agents to spread propaganda, films and television programs produced under contract, and books and articles written under contract. The closest analog to the UFO topic of a super high-level national security matter that's been covered up was the race to build the atomic bomb, the Manhattan Project. When people argue that the government can't keep secrets, a counterpoint is often, the government covered up the atomic bomb. So how did they do so? In part, through propaganda. The military told lies that we can bucket into the cover story and spin control bins of Hansen's framework. Hansen gives some good examples in the atomic bomb context. When the first atom bomb was being tested in New Mexico in July 1945, it created visible light at a distance of 125 miles. The Manhattan Project press agent claimed that this was an ammunition dump explosion. That's an example of a cover story. After the bombing of Hiroshima, the Army called a press conference in Tokyo to refute claims of radiation sickness. The Army claimed there was no such thing as radiation sickness, and that those reporting as much were falling victim to Japanese propaganda. Major General Leslie R. Groves, head of the Manhattan Project, declared, "This talk of radioactivity is so much nonsense." That's an example of spin control. I'm sure the people telling these kinds of lies, they don't blink. They don't have a modicum of regret. They're following orders for a mission that's viewed as critical to national security. They're probably sworn to lie to the public. That's why it's misguided to reflexively trust what comes out of the mouth of public officials, especially relating to matters that implicate national security. Psychological operations. It's another interesting propaganda method. And here, Hansen, with specific respect to UFOs, goes into the story of Generoso Pope, known as Gene Pope. There's actually a memorial to Gene Pope in the town, or a town nearby where I grew up, in Westchester County, north of New York City, in Tuckahoe, New York. Gene Pope owned the National Enquirer. For millennials or older, you'll remember Pope's ubiquitous newspapers in supermarket aisles. The headlines about UFOs and abductions, they were all the time, and they were sensational, if not outright absurd. If you wanted to discredit something, put it on the cover of National Enquirer. No one would take it seriously after that. So juxtapose the tone and tenor of the National Enquirer with the more restrained, if not openly scornful, coverage by the mainstream media directed at UFOs, when it was even covered. This juxtaposition boosted the disreputable public image of UFOs that U.S. intelligence agencies, behind the scenes, work so hard to create and sustain. Using the National Enquirer to highlight, but at the same time discredit, UFOs and surrounding phenomena, that's an example, very likely, of a deliberate psychological operation. Hansen goes at length in his book into the founding of the National Enquirer and Gene Pope's connections to the intelligence community. This is a subtle but surprisingly effective PSYOP on display in every supermarket aisle of the United States for most of our lives. Folks may ask, you really think people are behind the scenes scheming to censor and propagandize in the ways that Hansen writes about? My answer is unequivocally yes. I believe there are people in power, part of the unelected bureaucracy, the so-called deep state, who are trained in these methods. This is their tradecraft. They were probably trained in intelligence and counterintelligence principles and techniques. Maybe it wasn't called censorship, it wasn't called propaganda. Maybe it was. I mean, public relations is effectively propaganda. Regardless, they're taught how to use these methods to affect human behavior and beliefs. And they've been implementing these methods with respect to UFOs for longer than I've been alive, and as long as my dad's been alive. Thanks for joining me for this week's episode of Catskill Liminal Walk. Sorry, just taking in the heat, going through a heat wave in the Northeast and I believe most of the country. On the next episode, I'm still going through Terry Hansen's The Missing Times. I'm going to examine an example Hansen covers of UFO propaganda in action. It goes from a written policy that was discovered in a declassified document to implementation of that policy at the highest level of American entertainment. It's clear-cut evidence of the mainstream media slavishly following the national security state's policy to marginalize the UFO topic. Until then, see you next time on Catskill Liminal Walk.